The boardroom fell into a stunned silence as Elias Thorne rose to his feet. His janitor's work clothes stood in stark contrast to the sea of executive suits, and his heart hammered against his ribs with fierce urgency. "Don't sign the deal," he declared, his voice ringing out with more force than he had anticipated. Outside, the flash of cameras pulsed against the windows where reporters waited to capture the historic moment. Celine Brooks, the CEO of Brooks Industries, met his gaze, her pen frozen just above the contract. Security personnel began to advance toward him. The future of his daughter hung precariously in the balance. Once a prodigy on Wall Street, now a man who mopped floors, he knew he had only moments before he would be forcibly removed. Celine lifted a hand, halting the guards. She commanded everyone to leave the room except for him. The previous evening, Elias Thorne had moved with practiced quiet through the executive wing of Brooks Industries, emptying wastebaskets as he had been doing for some time. The polished corridors felt different after dark, stripped of the powerful figures in tailored suits and the echo of expensive shoes, free from the veneer of insincere smiles and strategic handshakes. He much preferred the honesty of the silence. He paused by the main conference room and saw that the lights were still on. While most of the executives had departed hours ago, he could discern a lone figure through the frosted glass. He recognized her silhouette instantly, Celine Brooks, the brilliant CEO who had inherited her father's empire. The break room was often filled with whispers about her genius and her ruthlessness. Elias, however, had learned that the safest path was to remain unseen. For a brief moment he watched her, struck by how her posture, hunched over her work, resembled his own daughter concentrating on her school assignments. The thought of Lila waiting for him at Mrs. Ellison's apartment prompted him to check his watch. He had to complete his shift and retrieve her before it grew too late. Elias began to push his cart onward, planning to circle back to the room later, but a sheaf of papers suddenly slid off the conference table, followed by Celine's weary sigh. Professional instinct compelled him to knock gently on the door. "Excuse me, ma'am, should I come back later?" Her head shot up, surprise registering on her features as if she had forgotten anyone else existed in the skyscraper. "No, it's all right. Please come in." Her voice was sharp, betraying the irritation of a broken concentration. As Elias stepped inside, Celine moved to collect her documents, fumbling and dropping several in her haste. He bent to help her, gathering the scattered pages. It was then that he saw it, a spreadsheet whose columns highlighted employee numbers across various divisions. His eyes locked onto a column titled Post-Acquisition Reductions. There, in stark red ink, were figures indicating thousands of roles slated for termination after the TechVision merger. This included the entire janitorial staff at the Chicago office. Elias's breath hitched when he saw his own department's code among those scheduled for outsourcing. His fingers clenched the paper as memories of Lila's medical bills, the past due rent notice, and the insulin prescription she needed next week flooded his mind. The fragile stability he had painstakingly pieced together after losing everything was about to be shattered once more. "Thank you," Celine said, reaching for the documents. But Elias hesitated, his gaze still fixed on the damning numbers. She followed his line of sight, and a look of understanding crossed her face. "That's confidential," she stated, her tone hardening. "Of course, my apologies," Elias responded, handing her the papers with a carefully neutral expression he had mastered during his fall from grace. As he turned to go, Celine's voice stopped him. "You're Elias, aren't you? The night shift." He paused, surprised she knew his name. "Yes, ma'am." She observed him for a long moment before dismissing him with a nod. "Good night." He completed the rest of his shift in a daze, his thoughts racing. By the time the sun rose, he had reached a decision. This was no longer just about his job. It was about every family that would be devastated while executives pocketed their bonuses. Some things were worth fighting for, even if it meant risking what little you had left. Elias Thorne still possessed one asset from his days on Wall Street, an intimate knowledge of how these deals truly functioned and the devastating price they exacted. The morning of the signing was a media spectacle. Security was stringent, but Elias, a familiar maintenance worker, slipped through a service entrance without a second glance. In the small locker room, his fingers trembled slightly as he buttoned his uniform. Tucked in his pocket was an employee roster he had printed from a maintenance computer, a list that represented families, years of dedication, and medical dependencies, the human element behind the cold figures. He doubted it would mean anything to someone like Celine Brooks, but he had to try. He owed it to Lila, to himself, and to the part of him that had died when he had chosen silence once before. When he entered the boardroom, timing his arrival just before the signing, no one paid him any mind. The invisibility of service staff was now his advantage. He stood near the water cooler, observing board members and executives exchanging congratulations as cameras flashed outside. Celine sat at the head of the long table, immaculate in a navy power suit, her hair styled in intricate braids that were pulled back severely. She projected confidence. Yet Elias saw the strain in her shoulders and the way her eyes occasionally flickered toward her CFO, Victor Lang, who hovered nearby. When the documents were finally set before her, a subtle hesitation in her movement gave Elias the final impetus he needed. He moved forward just as a hush fell over the room, and Celine lifted her pen. After her command cleared the room, Elias stood alone, facing Celine across the vast, polished table. Security guards stood watch just beyond the doors. The unsigned contract was a silent testament between them. "You have a moment," she said, her voice a low, controlled hum, "to explain why I shouldn't have you arrested for this disruption." Elias held her gaze. "Because you already sense that something's wrong with this deal. I saw it in your hesitation." He placed the employee roster on the table. Thousands of people. They aren't just numbers on a page. They have families, medical conditions, mortgages. The projections Victor Lang presented to you have been manipulated. The so-called cost savings are achieved by gutting the workforce while inflating executive compensation. He watched her eyes narrow, her mind clearly processing his words. How would a janitor know any of that? Elias took a deep breath. "Because before I cleaned this office, I analyzed mergers for Goldman Sachs. I did that until I refused to approve a deal almost identical to this one." Celine's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. She picked up the employee roster, her eyes scanning the names. "Even if you're telling the truth, the board has given its unanimous approval. The documents are ready for my signature." Elias didn't flinch. "If you do the real financial models, you'll see TechVision is overvalued. Their innovation pipeline is barren. I found their R&D reports in a recycling bin. They are selling you an empty shell, and your board is complicit." The color drained from Celine's face. "That is an incredibly serious accusation." Elias nodded. "Apparently it's one I'm willing to lose my job over." A tense silence filled the space between them. Finally, Celine pressed the intercom. "Inform everyone the signing has been postponed due to a technical issue. No further questions." She then turned back to Elias. "My penthouse this evening. Bring all the proof you have. If you are wasting my time, I will personally ensure you never find work in this city again." As security escorted him from the building, the gravity of his actions settled upon him. He had almost certainly lost his job, no matter the outcome. On the bus, he called Mrs. Ellison, asking if she could watch Lila for a few more hours that evening. The elderly woman agreed, though her concerned inquiries about his early departure from work were difficult to evade. Back at his small apartment, Elias rummaged through boxes he had never fully unpacked and found his old laptop with its financial analysis software. Though time had passed, certain skills were indelible. He had compiled a thorough analysis backing his claims. He changed into the only respectable clothes he owned, a white shirt and navy slacks that were now a bit loose, and made his way to the address Celine had given him. Her penthouse crowned a sleek downtown skyscraper. When the lobby security called up, Elias was surprised to hear Celine's voice on the other end, telling them to send him up immediately. The elevator ride was long enough for doubt to creep in, questioning his analysis, his decision, his very sanity for confronting one of the most powerful women in Chicago. The elevator doors opened directly into her apartment, a space that was both stunning and starkly impersonal. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a panoramic vista of the city, but the minimalist decor gave it the feel of a luxury hotel suite rather than a home. Celine stood by the windows, still in her business suit, a glass of amber liquid in her hand. "You're punctual," she observed, motioning to a dining table where several monitors were already set up. "Show me." Without any pleasantries, they immersed themselves in the data. Elias pointed out the discrepancies, the hidden liabilities, and the wildly inflated projections. As he guided her through his findings, he could see her sharp intellect at work as she questioned, challenged, and connected the dots. The hours passed in focused intensity, and for a moment, Elias nearly forgot the chasm that separated their lives. That was until his phone rang. It was Mrs. Ellison, her voice fraught with worry. "Lila's fever has spiked again." "Spiked?" Elias's heart clenched. "I have to go," he said, hastily gathering his things. "My daughter is sick." Celine looked up, genuine human concern momentarily replacing the CEO's mask. "Is it serious?" Elias hesitated before admitting, "She has type 1 diabetes. Her blood sugar has been unstable. I just have to get home." He was almost at the elevator when Celine called out, "Wait, I'll drive you." Before he could object, she had her keys and coat. The sheer incongruity of the situation struck him as they descended in the elevator, the CEO of Brooks Industries and her janitor heading to his modest apartment in her high-end SUV. The drive through the city was mostly silent, punctuated only by Elias's directions. When they arrived outside his building with its peeling paint and a security door propped open by a brick, Elias felt a hot flush of shame which he immediately pushed away. This was his reality, and he wouldn't apologize for it. "Thank you for the ride," he said formally, preparing to get out. To his surprise, Celine turned off the engine. "I'm coming in. If your daughter needs a doctor, I can help." The apartment was small but immaculately kept, the discipline of a single father apparent in every tidy corner. Mrs. Ellison met them at the door, her face a mask of confusion at the sight of the elegantly dressed woman with Elias. His attempt at an explanation was cut short by a weak whimper from Lila's room. Elias rushed to his daughter's side and found her flushed and disoriented, her glucose monitor displaying dangerously high levels. "We have to get her to a hospital," he said, a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with the day's earlier confrontation. "I'll call an ambulance," Celine offered, reaching for her phone. Elias shook his head, the mental calculation swift and automatic. "I'll drive her." He didn't mention that his insurance had lapsed, or that this visit would bury him deeper in medical debt. Something in his expression must have conveyed this, because Celine simply stated, "I'm taking you both to Northwestern Memorial." Now her tone left no room for debate. Minutes later, they were racing through the city streets, Lila wrapped in a blanket on Elias's lap. At the hospital, Celine spoke quietly with an intake nurse, and suddenly they were being led to a private room where a team of doctors materialized within moments. Elias sat by his daughter's bed, clutching her small hand as the medical staff worked around them. Celine stayed in the background, a silent, watchful presence, making calls in hushed tones. Hours crept by, and slowly Lila's condition began to stabilize. As dawn approached, she finally drifted into a peaceful sleep. In the quiet of the early morning, Elias and Celine sat in uncomfortable chairs outside Lila's room, exhaustion etched on their faces. A nurse offered them coffee. "Why did you help us?" Elias finally asked, the question that had been burning in his mind all night. Celine stared into her cup. "Maybe I'm tired of a world where decisions are made without ever seeing the people they affect." She looked up, her eyes meeting his. "Or maybe I wanted to understand how someone goes from Wall Street to pushing a janitor's cart." The invitation was clear. Elias hadn't shared his story with anyone since moving to Chicago, burying it beneath the daily struggle for survival. But the raw humanity of the night had dismantled his defenses. "I was a rising star at Goldman," he began softly, "specializing in tech mergers. I was the lead analyst on an acquisition much like your Tech Vision deal. I discovered irregularities, massive layoffs, mass synergy optimization." He rubbed his weary eyes. "When I raised my concerns, my superiors told me to fix the numbers, not the deal. I refused." His voice grew heavy. "Then my wife Elena was diagnosed with a rare cancer. Suddenly, I was facing staggering medical bills, a terrified young daughter, and a choice." Celine listened, her expression unreadable. "I chose my family over my principles. I revised the analysis. The deal closed. Thousands lost their jobs, but I kept mine for a time. They found a pretext to fire me right after Elena passed away. No severance, no insurance. My reputation ruined." A bitterness he thought he had buried resurfaced. The universe has a twisted sense of humor. Celine was quiet for a long moment. "And yet, knowing what it could cost you, you spoke up yesterday." Elias glanced toward Lila's room. "Maybe I needed her to know that her father could still do the right thing, even when it was the hardest thing." The admission felt vulnerable. Celine nodded slowly. "I built my career by being tougher and more ruthless than any man in the room. My father taught me that sentiment is a liability in business." She paused. "But lately, I've wondered what the point of it all is. An empty penthouse, no life beyond the office, and decisions that look brilliant on paper but keep me awake at night." The morning light illuminated the shadows beneath her eyes. "I never see the Elias Thorns affected by my choices. Until now." By afternoon, Lila was stable enough for discharge. Elias braced himself for the bill, only to be informed that it had been handled. Outside, Celine's driver was waiting. "I have to get back to the office," she said. "The board is in a panic over the delay." She handed Elias a business card with her personal number on the back. "I want to continue our discussion about Tech Vision. For now, take a few days to be with Lila. Your job is safe. The professional facade was back, but something fundamental had changed. Elias accepted the card, torn between gratitude and pride. As they parted, Lila looked back at Celine. "Will you come visit us again?" she asked with a child's candor. Celine seemed taken aback. "I'd like that," she replied, a genuine smile softening her features for the first time. The following days felt surreal. Elias received a call from HR confirming his paid leave, and Lila, with her incredible resilience, recovered quickly. They spent quiet evenings together, carefully avoiding the topic of what would happen upon his return to work. In the days that followed, their fragile peace was shattered. A breaking news alert lit up Elias's phone. Brooks Industries' acquisition of TechVision in jeopardy. CEO questions deal. Moments later, his phone rang. It was Celine. Her voice was tense. "They're coming for you. Victor discovered you accessed company files. He's filed a police report for corporate espionage." Before Elias could process her words, a heavy knock rattled his apartment door. Two police officers stood outside with a warrant. As they led him away in handcuffs, he saw Lila's terrified face, Mrs. Ellison holding her back. "It's going to be okay, sweetheart," he called out, his voice trembling. "Call Miss Brooks." The next few hours were a blur of holding cells and interrogation rooms. Exhaustion and fear warred within him. What had he been thinking, challenging people with so much power? The door opened, and to his astonishment, Celine Brooks walked in, followed by an older, distinguished man with a briefcase. "Mr. Harrove is the best defense attorney in Chicago," she said. "You're being released. Bail has been posted." Elias stared at her. "Why? Victor is your CFO. The board is your responsibility." Celine's expression hardened. "Because they lied to me. I had an independent firm review the TechVision financials. Everything you said was true. And worse, Victor and Harrison Vale have been taking kickbacks to push this deal." As they walked out, she draped her designer coat over his shoulders, a strangely intimate gesture in the sterile police station. "The board is trying to force me out. Tomorrow's emergency shareholder meeting will determine both of our futures." Outside, her car was waiting. "Lila is at my penthouse with my assistant. I thought she'd be more comfortable there." The thoughtfulness of this act amid the corporate war she was fighting moved Elias deeply. As they drove, Celine outlined the battle ahead. "They're painting you as a disgruntled ex-financier with a grudge. They've already leaked your termination from Goldman to the press." Elias closed his eyes. "And you, what's your position?" Her hands tightened on the wheel. "By morning, I have to decide whether to sign the deal and save my job or fight the board and likely lose everything my father built." The unspoken question hung between them: was integrity worth the price? When they reached the penthouse, Lila launched herself into Elias's arms. Over her head, he mouthed, "Thank you," to Celine. Later, after Lila was asleep, Elias found Celine on the balcony. "I keep thinking about what you said," she began, "about needing your daughter to know you could do the right thing. No one has ever seen me make that kind of choice. My father would say the right choice is whatever protects the company." She finally turned to face him. "I think I'm terrified of finding out who I am without the title of CEO." The next morning, Elias sat in the back of the shareholder meeting in a borrowed suit. Victor Lang and the board chairman, Harrison Vale, made their case, dismissing the issue as a personnel problem. Then it was Celine's turn. She walked to the podium with a single sheet of paper. "For years, I have dedicated my life to this company," she began. "Our reputation for integrity has been my highest priority. That integrity is why I cannot, in good conscience, sign the TechVision acquisition agreement." Murmurs filled the room. "The financial models presented to this board are fundamentally flawed and deliberately misleading," she continued, her voice gaining strength as she laid out the evidence. When she finished, she placed her resignation letter on the podium. "If this deal proceeds, it will be without my participation. I refuse to build success on the broken lives of our employees." The room erupted into chaos. Hours later, the outcome was clear. The deal was dead. So was Celine's tenure as CEO. She kept her shares and a board seat, but her leadership role was over. As they left the headquarters together that evening, both professionally adrift, Celine surprised him by laughing, a genuine, unburdened sound. "You know what's strange? I feel lighter than I have in years." Elias understood. Freedom often felt that way, even when it came at a high price. Later, Elias was kneeling in a community garden showing Lila how to plant tomatoes when his phone rang. It was Celine. They had started a new venture together, a responsible investment fund. "The funding came through," she announced. "We can present the offer next week." Elias smiled, watching Lila water the seedlings. "That's job saved. A good start." Celine's voice softened. "Are you two still coming for dinner tonight? I tried that pasta recipe. The casual domesticity of the question was striking. Wouldn't miss it, he replied. Lila made you something. That evening, in Celine's penthouse, now warmed by books, plants, and Lila's scattered toys, they celebrated. Lila presented Celine with a drawing of 3 figures in a garden under a smiling sun. It's us, she explained to you, me, and Dad. Celine's eyes glistened as she hugged the little girl. Over Lila's head, her gaze met Elias's. A world of unspoken feeling passed between them. In the months that followed, life had found a new rhythm. Their firm Phoenix capital was thriving. Elias's financial acumen, sharpened by hardship, was in full force. Celine had discovered a gift for turning around struggling companies without the usual human cost. Lila flourished, her health stable. The 3 of them had become a family, unconventional but honest. On a crisp autumn evening, they walked through Millennium Park. Lila ran ahead to the Cloudgate sculpture, leaving them alone. Do you ever regret it? Elias asked. Walking away from everything you built? Celine watched Lila's reflection multiply in the curved steel. I didn't walk away from what mattered, she said, her hand finding his. I just finally understood what was worth building. They stood together, watching Lila laugh. 2 people who had lost nearly everything, only to find that new beginnings often rise from the most unexpected moments, like when a janitor stands up in a boardroom and changes the course of countless lives with a single courageous truth. Sometimes the most valuable deals aren't signed on paper, but are written on the heart with courage, second chances, in the family you choose.